finding really profitable users on the web, Facebook, and mobile. And I think they'll tell you basically the same thing, which is UA is easy, doing it right is hard. So you ain't easy is probably correct. Blame that guy in the second row for the pronunciation. All right. So what I wanted to do before we get started is just quickly tell those of you who don't know what we do at Playnomics, what we're about. We're a in-app marketing platform. We use prediction and data mining to understand each and every member of a digital audience. Started in games, now moving across most types of applications in mobile and web. And generally, we've been focused on predicting value of users for retention purposes. And recently, we launched a product where we can predict the value of an acquired user almost immediately. And so we see the benefit of that is when you're buying traffic, as these folks will tell you, you're projecting out 60 to 90 days. How do you know that someone's valuable? We can do it very, very quickly. So that's our foray into the acquisition world, and as we dove into it more and more, we started to see all sorts of crazy wrinkles and tips and tricks, and that's why we've assembled this crack panel here today. So maybe before we start, I can have each of the panel introduce themselves, and then I think Andy's going to be doing a little overview on specifically what he's been seeing at Ampush in the last year and changes in the acquisition market as it relates to Facebook. But actually, before I start that, how many people here are aware and experienced with user acquisition? Okay. How many people have never done any kind of user acquisition before but intend to? Okay. So we'll make this sort of a beginner, advanced beginner, getting to the intermediate session pretty quickly. I think most people here would love to hear some real secrets and sort of the average CPI that everybody's paying associated with their LTV, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so with that, let's go from the far end of the table down. Maybe say, I would love to hear who you are, what's the one thing you want people to take away from this panel, and what you're going to do over the holiday break.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Oh, yes. Cool. Awesome. Hi, I'm Scott Bauer. I head up UA for a company called Blue Shell Games. We are a small social casino game developer. We were actually born as a Facebook first company and are now on mobile. Prior to that, I spent about a year and a half at a company called TinyCo, doing UA there. And then before that, I actually was in Vegas, working for the casinos, doing financial and marketing analytics, trying to figure out who gets the free cars and free hotel rooms and free buffets. Let's see, what do I want people to get out of this? I think Chetan talked about this. It says UA ain't easy, or whatever. It is. I mean, it is and it isn't, right? So UA is easy. Good UA is really hard. So making sure you're getting the right people. If I just need to go out and get a bunch of users, that's pretty easy. And I think it'd be great for the people who aren't as experienced on the UA side to walk away with something that makes them say, okay, I've got to work to make this work for me and make some money for our company. What am I doing over Christmas break? Don't quite have plans yet. Why, you got something good going on?
My 2-year-old needs a babysitter.
So I'm going to may go up to Tahoe, do a little skiing. It's going to be cold either way.
All right. I'm sorry I had to tell people about early because I was hoping one of you would volunteer at some point. Okay.
Hi, so my name is Tyler York. I work for a company called Grand2 as the Director of Business Development. We are a mobile tournament platform. Pretty much any game that outputs a score, we can make your game into a Wizards Friends multiplayer thing. And Previous to that, I did a lot of the sort of like user acquisition discovery stuff at a company called Bettable, which Caddy will tell you a lot more about probably. And I also did consulting for Coolbit, which is a casino company, and Villain, which is a casual mobile game company, and did that 6 months or so off and on. What do I want people to get out of this panel? Honestly, these guys are probably going to say more interesting things than me, but I think that the fact that keeping a customer and how you do that is as important as adding customers. That won't be the focus of the panel, but keep that in the back of your head as you're thinking about these things. And then what am I doing for Christmas? Honestly, probably hanging out with my dog and my family, and then trying really hard not to commit to anything.
Hey guys. So my name is Caddy Srinivasan. I'm the head of UA and marketing at a company called Bettable, which Tyler used to work at. We are a platform for real money games. So essentially we offer developers to come in and build games on our platform using our APIs and some of the math behind the casino style games. We operate only in the UK right now, but obviously since the US is opening up, we have our eye on expanding there as well. Prior to that, I was at another gaming company called Ouya, which is actually upstairs here. And before that, I was at Ubisoft. Before that, I did a lot of marketing analytics for consumer packaged goods, so I can tell you which kind of bread is sold in which Walmart and how much that costs, if that's of interest. What I would love for you to take away from this is, all the things that Scott's mentioned and Tyler's mentioned, but in addition to that, this landscape changes really rapidly. So for me, it's been a learning experience trying to keep up. How often should you change according to what the landscape is doing, and where's the new source of information? How do you process this new information? How do you keep up with what's going on? That's what I would love for you to take away from this. What am I doing over the break? I have a 19-month-old, so we can swap.
Great. My name's Andy Wells. I work for a company called Ampush, which is one of Facebook's strategic preferred marketing developers, which basically is a fancy way of saying we run Facebook ads at scale for clients across all different verticals. I have been there for about 1.5 years now and manage some of our strategic clients across all different types, anywhere from e-commerce, travel, entertainment, gaming, with a focus on mobile over the past year or so. Before that, I got degrees in economics and Chinese from Dartmouth and spent 2 years teaching in China through a fellowship. So I guess I decided that 2 years of having no Facebook meant that I should go find a job that was exclusively on Facebook. But yeah, I think in terms of what to take away from this, I would say along the same lines that all of these guys have said, but specifically, and I'm sure everybody on the panel will speak to this, UA takes a level of creativity and kind of testing out unknown waters. And like you said, everything, it's changing every day. So there's definitely no set standard or method for doing this. We see that specifically on the Facebook platform. You see it across tons of different channels. But definitely think outside the box, be creative, and think of solutions to problems that you may not have the tools or resources to solve at that moment. And what am I doing over the break? So I'm heading back home to Utah, so hopefully I'll be getting a lot of snow, but probably won't be skiing because I just had ACL surgery this year, so probably not a good idea. But I'll be jealous of everybody else who's doing it.
You make snowmen.
Very true.
Yeah.
I'll be making lots of snowmen and snow angels.
My name's Lauren. I'm the consultant, and I help developers be discovered, grow, and monetize their applications and their games. I don't like to talk about how much experience I have because it makes me feel really old. But I was a fine arts major and I got into programming. And so really for me, it's about the user experience and the habitual loop that you're trying to teach your user to adopt. And the biggest thing that everyone should take away from this is don't spend your marketing budget. I can talk a little bit about why I feel that way later, or I can talk after. But that's my best advice. Wait as long as you can to spend any money on user acquisition. But whether you think you're an expert or a beginner, that's my advice. Definitely wait. And make sure you can measure. Data is really important. Over Christmas, I'm going to Ireland. I've never been there, so I'm going to drink some pints and eat some spuds.
Awesome. All right. So Andy, I think you wanted to kick it off just with a brief overview of the last year, specifically the big change, which is Facebook becoming really relevant across mobile specifically, certainly obviously the Facebook platform, but becoming a real force to reckon with in terms of installs and acquisition.
Yep. I'll actually, I'll just sit for this. I had a few slides, but not super important. I was actually told that I was going to cover way too much for the introduction, so I'll keep it very short and leave the discussion for the entire panel, meaning that probably the slides aren't super important. But yeah, just to reiterate, I want to thank Kate and Chafin for setting this up. Like they said, UA ain't easy. Setting something up like this is not easy either. The turnout's great, so thanks so much. And round of applause for those guys. In terms of just giving a quick introduction and kind of going back to what I was saying about getting creative with user acquisition, I think when I first entered the space, which was not too long ago, back in late 2012, it's crazy to see kind of the progress and the sophistication that we've seen on Facebook specifically, and I'm sure these guys can talk to improvements across all different channels for user acquisition. But just to give like a quick story from where I started to where we are today, I'll use Living Social as an example, which is one of the clients that I was working with in my early days at Ampush. And the takeaway here again is that user acquisition takes creativity, and you don't always necessarily need all the official tools to solve something, as long as you can kind of figure out a solution that works at the time. So I came in basically trying to drive new users for Living Social at scale. And they actually had a really good, sophisticated model for determining the lifetime value of users and measuring exactly what that value was across different channels. And so what we were doing on Facebook to begin with was we were running exclusively right-hand side ads and customizing those for the users that we were trying to hit. So if you guys can imagine, I did have a slide to show this, but just imagine in your head, getting onto your Facebook page and all those ads that pop up on the right-hand side, oftentimes with scantily clad women or pictures of guys saying that you can lose 50 pounds in a week, something like that. Basically kind of the ads that we try to stay away from on Facebook nowadays, but would lead to trying to get people to click through as much as possible, and kind of playing that game of low click-through rates, higher cost per clicks, and basically unfortunately a higher cost per acquisition than we were looking for. And what we had figured out at the time was that this was actually pretty good for Living Social. It was a decent channel, but it wasn't hitting those LTV goals that they were looking for. So although we were able to drive users at a certain price that was comparable to other channels they were using, it wasn't enough that it would be profitable for them to continue running at scale. So one thing we had noticed though was that right next to this tiny little right-hand rail was this big spot called the newsfeed, where there was a lot more engaging content. You had much larger images, more space to actually describe what your product was, etc. And we wanted to use a similar strategy of customizing ads within this space to send to users that we thought would be most relevant. So, for example, using targeting methods, we would go ahead and find people who maybe specified that they like sushi on Facebook, and we'd hit them with copy and images describing Living Social deals at sushi restaurants. We really wanted to do this in the newsfeed, but at the time, and this was literally end of 2012, early 2013, Facebook did not have a way of creating tons of iterations of these and then displaying them in the newsfeed. So if we wanted to create 100 different posts that had slightly different copy and slightly different images, what would happen is that Living Social's fan page would end up with 100 nearly identical posts. So if you were an organic user going to the page, you would see 100 posts saying, get sushi at 70% off, or join Living Social now to find the best deals on sushi. Wouldn't be extremely engaging, obviously. So that was kind of the problem that we saw. We thought, all right, the newsfeed, way more engaging, way higher click-through rates, way cheaper costs, but how do we actually show this to relevant users and follow a strategy of customizing those ads for each user? So what we ended up doing was a very sort of hacky method, and Trevor, who's in the audience, can speak to this a little bit as well, but we ended up creating hundreds of posts basically manually and then hiding those immediately. So everything that would show up on the page, it would show up on the Living Social page for about a second, and then we would hide it. So all we had to do was put paid promotion behind this, show it to specific users that we wanted to, and then all the organic users wouldn't have to be berated by these 100 of almost exactly the same page posts. And this led us to be able to drop our costs, improve our cost per acquisition at the same time, and basically scale up to about 10 to 20x what we were doing like a month or two before. So the reason I share this example is because user acquisition just, it takes thinking outside the box a little bit, and it takes just testing out different methods. And even if you don't have necessarily an official way of doing this, like Facebook now has, where you can create unpublished posts that wouldn't show up on the page at all, there was still a way to get around this. So I think that's important to think about across all user acquisition efforts. So what we've seen over the course of 2013 is a huge shift on Facebook from purely page engagement, driving fans to a brand's page, basically doing stuff on the Facebook platform that stays within that platform, to being able to drive great performance on direct response, user acquisition, and specifically mobile, outside of the platform entirely. So I think for the mobile app install ads, which I'm sure a lot of you who do user acquisition and those who are just getting started will definitely want to investigate these. But mobile app install ads have been a huge improvement, and they were actually released late 2012, but really caught on early 2013 when people saw the opportunity here. And I think there's a couple of reasons that these have been really successful, and a couple spots where we can talk about sort of the evolution over 2013. One of those being measurement specifically. So when we started really focusing on mobile, we would have a lot of clients coming to us with not even, sometimes they would have install tracking, sometimes they would have no tracking. Clients that had no tracking, they had heard that these were successful. They thought, all right, let's throw some money at it. We'll see if this is converting on our back end, and then we'll continue to run based on, you know, how many, if we're comparing our organic users versus our bump once we started running on Facebook, what's the difference there? I think the big shift over 2013 has been the improvement in measurement across mobile app advertisers. So now Facebook has an SDK that basically allows you not only to track the install, but all of the events that are happening post-install within your app. So you can actually figure out not only are you driving a cheap cost per new user, but are you driving somebody who will actually engage with your app and monetize. In addition, Facebook has a bunch of integrated mobile measurement partners. Some of you probably work with HasOffers, Kochava, AdX, to name a few. And these guys allow tracking and measurement across all channels. So that's a great improvement. We see almost all clients come to us now with some way of tracking post-install. So they're not just looking for the cheapest users possible, but they're also looking for engaged and monetizing users. In terms of targeting, there's been huge improvements as well. So aside from targeting users based on their demographics, their sort of likes and interests on Facebook, there's also been improvements in taking actual emails that you might have based on other apps that you've driven or based on just your CRM database, uploading those and being able to target users based on that. So if you have a new app, targeting your existing users through Facebook user IDs or email addresses. If you are looking to drive new users to the same app where you already have a large database of users, you can upload those now, and Facebook will run an algorithm that will go and match up your top 1 or 5% most similar users on Facebook. So these are called lookalike audiences. We can talk a little bit more in depth about these, but they've driven great performance so far, not only on just a cost per install basis, but also user quality basis. We'll also get a little bit more into, I'm sure, like creative best practices along the way, but creative has also improved from to a larger format, more calls to action, etc. Outside of just improvements on Facebook, the other topic that I wanted to hit on was kind of thinking about your Q4 and Q1 budget allocation. We can talk different channels moving forward. Facebook specifically, we're definitely going to see pretty high increases in prices over Q4. So just a couple quick thoughts on this. If your app isn't a seasonal app, if it's something that a user will be of the same value if you drive that user in December versus January, think about shifting budget towards Q1, where competition will decrease and we'll see more device activations overall post-Christmas. Also think about looking internationally. So aside from a lot of the Western countries that put a huge emphasis on Christmas and stuff, there's a lot of countries where you can still be driving new users at a similar cost to what you are seeing throughout the rest of the year. But I think overall it makes sense to kind of determine based on your app and what you're seeing whether or not you're seeing increases in prices. Lastly, just a few other things to consider for Q1. There was mention about obviously the importance of retaining users and re-engaging users that you already have. So one thing to consider is mobile app re-engagement ads, which basically allow you to target users that you already have within your app, and target them with specific creative that will deep link to a page within your app. So if you're trying to drive purchases, trying to get users to engage with your game, whatever it may be, there should be a use for running this in tandem with just straight up install ads where you're trying to find new users. So I think it's always important to consider not only the new users you're driving, but also retaining the current users and re-engaging them and creating more value out of those users. And I think I'm coming up to my time, so.
Oh, that's good. Thank you for that, Andy. And I think that brought up a ton of great points that I imagine a lot of the panel wants to react to. Violet.
Well, actually, there's one thing that he said that I really, really liked, which is to get unusual results, you have to do unusual things. So like his example with Living Social, where they had to post things and hide them immediately. The majority of really like outstandingly overly successful user acquisition campaigns that I've seen have been something like that, where you're almost like cheating a little bit or breaking the system in such a way that you get an advantage that most people don't even see and most people don't want to deal with. So I'd love to hear if the panel could speak to maybe experiences they've had doing things like that, or just another example of that, because I think that's a really important point.
So Scott, maybe you want to have any weird examples of where you've been really successful, where you thought you may not be, or illegally or so?
Yeah, no, so I can't give away all my secrets, but I think sort of a little different approach. I think one thing that has worked well for me in the past is trying to work with new ad networks and new people who are trying creative things and doing unique things. Specifically, some of the video guys early on, right? A year and a half, almost 2 years ago, working with Ad Colony and Bungle when they were brand new. These days, the rich media ads, I work with some guys, M Nectar, that are doing some cool stuff, and there's some guys out there that are actually doing ads that are your game played in the cloud, kind of a saved game state where the ad actually just pops up and starts playing your game right there. You're already at level 25, you have unlimited coins, you just play for 10 seconds, done, would you like to download now? And I think those kind of creative ways of creating are kind of the new thing and what's going to move user acquisition forward, right? Banner ads are going to be here for a long time, but they're just sort of static, boring. So getting to that next level of creative, I think, is going to be really, really big.
So maybe we can just step back a second before we go to the sort of future edge of UA. And so Lauren and Caddy, you guys went from different areas into UA. I think it was fine arts and CPG to UA. Maybe Lauren, you can kick it off, and then Caddy, I'd love to hear what you think. What is the best way to get started? So let's start with the beginner, easy. I've got $20,000. How do I make sure I don't lose that $20,000? And what's the basic stuff you need to do basic user acquisition well? And then I think the next question probably, and I think this is where Scott and Tyler and Andy will weigh in a little bit more, is, okay, now here, am I paying too much? And then I think it's, am I measuring value right? And then from there, I think it kind of flows to where do I put my bucks and how do I balance them? So maybe Lauren, you can kick it off with, I've got money, I don't want to lose it, don't lose my marketing budget.
Sure, so for me, I think the most important thing to do first is really establish your goals. Making sure that you understand what the goals of your product are at the time that you're spending your budget. So over the course of the lifetime of your product, you're going to have different goals. Sometimes it's going to be to grow your audience, sometimes it's going to be engage your audience, and sometimes it's going to be monetize your audience. And depending on what you want your users to do, that's how you utilize your marketing budget. So I'm going to stick to kind of this continuous reminder, which is don't spend your money if you don't have to. So when you first start to kick off a product, I think that the best way to understand the value of your users is to look at your organic users. They're going to behave in a different way than the users that you acquire through paid channels. Usually they're going to be more engaged, more enthusiastic, and they're going to be your most valuable players. So if they're not doing things that you think are valuable, and they're not creating projections that are going to give you positive ROI, then you're not ready to spend your budget, because the people that you pay for are never going to perform in that way, right? You're seeking them out. Your organic users seek you out because they think you have a service that you're providing. So the most important thing is just to understand your audience from wherever you are, establish goals. Keep asking yourself, what are my goals right now? Sometimes you have a runway, so you want to grow your audience. Sometimes you want to get to the top of the cakes, and sometimes you just want to have a productive business, right? You can do that with 150,000 DAU. You can have a profitable business. So you just have to remind yourself what the goals are, and then look at what users are doing in your game and make sure that what the users are doing is what you want everyone to do.
All right, Caddy, now you've seen your organic users,
Yeah.
early stage. Do you agree with that? You look at what they're doing, figure
Yeah,
out what they're about.
I would, so when you start with something new, something where you've not tested the product, and so this is something completely new, you have a limited marketing budget, you're essentially trying to prove product market fit at that point. So it is extremely critical that you are aiming to see if this product even works in the market, if there are consumers even willing to come in and engage with your product, pay the product. So I always recommend that with anything, you create this soft launch period. Obviously, stepping back a little bit, you have to have an overall strategy of how you're going to prove this product market fit. But the first piece of this is the soft launch period, usually maybe a week, a couple of weeks, where you are spending very, very little amounts of money on Facebook, trying to see if you can hit the demographic that you have created this product for. For instance, if you have a shooter game, you want to target males 35 to 50 who also like Call of Duty or something along those lines, and you want to see what the dynamics of that group is going to be. How much are you going to end up paying for that? If you have a $50 daily budget, are you going to end up getting 5 people or 10 people or 100 people? How are they going to retain in this game? How are they going to convert? So the first 2 weeks are going to be very critical in mapping out your product and how your players are going to track to that product. If everything goes right, if you hit the certain metrics that you want, 40% day one conversion rate, 80% tutorial completion rate, then you're ready to take on a slightly more aggressive push where you can expect to start getting or seeing some revenue numbers and seeing some ROI. So I would take it like that. I would take it in small chunks of 2 week, almost think of it like a sprint cycle. Take it in 2 week chunks. Establish, like Lauren said, establish what your goals will be for each of those 2 week periods. Really aggressively measure how those metrics are doing, and then don't be afraid to go back to the product and say this doesn't work. You will never become successful just by optimizing UA. The product side of it has to enter the equation. You have to work with product to make sure that not only are you bringing down the cost of UA, but that they are driving up the LTV. LTV is usually not in your control, it is in the product. The last thing I would say is we've used this tool called Lean Canvas to document or think through experiments that we want to do. So it's been a very good tool for us to introduce that discipline of thinking through what experiments we want to have, what kind of cycle of iterations we want to go through. What is the assumption we're making about this experiment? What are we going to get out of it? And this is not just at a business model level, but at very granular level of details. For instance, we thought that this one particular app would, appeal to this set of people. So that was an experiment. We tried, it didn't work out, so we now know better. We're going to go back to the drawing board, think of new experiments. So the Lean Canvas has been very useful for us to keep track of something like that. And this kind of fits into that 2 week cycle that I was talking about. So that's how I would start thinking about how to divide up that 20,000 initial budget you have.
Got it. So you've done your 2 weeks. Now you have a sense of what your product's like. So Tyler, what's next? How do you know what you're bidding? Does that flow out of these 2 weeks? Do you agree that that's the way to do it? And how do you know LTV and how do you measure that stuff? And Scott, I'd love for you to weigh in on that as well.
Yeah, just to start off, Scott's definitely gonna have a better like current market knowledge of prices, but I think that in general, what you wanna do is have a basket of channels that you're gonna try out. $20,000, you probably could do 5K budgets with 4, let's say. And you're usually gonna want at least 2 that you're very familiar with to set almost as a control, kind of in the experiment mindset that Caddy was talking about. And then 2 that are maybe more experimental. Or at least that's how I would split it up. You can split it up whatever way you prefer, but the idea is you should have at least one control, so you can say, for instance, if the control is failing and all the other channels are failing, then maybe it is the product, as Caddy pointed out. So really, in doing sort of lean marketing, you want to pretty much like have an experiment set in like a 2-week sprint. And that's definitely going to be the best way to find the channels that work the fastest. It'll also give you, for an individual product, some kind of a map of what prices to expect, because every product is going to be different in how people engage.